what's up, everybody? My name is Steven. I am back. I'm the host of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Joining me, as always, are Alex and Tyler. Alex had his week as the host, so thank you, Alex, for hosting in my absence. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good, and really, I win either way, because if people decide that they don't like you as the host anymore, I'm going to leave them with the memory of me as host, but refuse to do it. And if people like you instead of me, then I still have less work to do. So really, I win either way.
It's a win-win situation for you. Tyler, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing just fine. I'm glad things did not blow up while you were gone, like the White House in Independence Day. Everything worked out very, very well, and so I'm happy. Thank you, Alex, for hosting and taking care of things because I didn't want to. Steven, how was your vacation? How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It was a good vacation. Got to be able to see some family and friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. A couple family members of mine have asthma, and so have been very high risk because of COVID. So we've had to stay away and be careful. So it was great to get back into town. I went golfing with my dad for the first time in like 15 years, which was really fun as well. So definitely a good vacation. And yeah, I did. My dad doesn't hit it as far as he used to. So, but it's all good. And we want to wish everybody a happy Independence Day. We are recording this on Sunday the 4th. Apparently this is a 3-day celebration this time, so hopefully you guys have had some fun and will have some fun, and we'll have some fun in this episode today. So we've got a special treat for our audio listeners as well as our video listeners today. We have an interview that Alex and I did with Robert Mays of The Athletic. Really a big fan of that podcast in general, and learn a lot every single time that they come on. So I really wanted to be able to reach out to him, get his thoughts on Brandon Staley and Justin Herbert, because that's been some very relevant conversations that they've had. So the audio version of that interview is going to happen right now. As always, the video version of that interview is in a separate video. That being said, here's Robert Mays. All right, Alex, any takeaways that you had from our discussion with Robert Mays?
Well, I'll start with the podcast first that he did with Brandon Staley. I thought it was funny that, they spent like 40 minutes talking about the defense, which is as natural. And then they spent like 7 talking about, whatever, Justin Herbert, I guess. The interview was really fun. It was fun to pick his brain and sort of what he thinks about Justin Herbert and all that. And I think the quote that really stuck out to me was when he was talking about the fact that Brandon Staley can't get stagnant. Of the fact that, we can look at all these videos of the Rams defense or, his tenures in previous places as another coach. But I think that he's going to have to do different things with the Chargers. So, maybe 60, 70% of the plays will be the Rams, but, you'll have to have 30-40% kind of new stuff thrown in. So, even if you watch film, it just won't look exactly like what you look like, because Staley just has to keep innovating.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I mean, kind of in the same vein of the conversation, Mays talked about, the lack of linebacker usage with the Rams wasn't necessarily because he didn't want to use them. It was more just a lack of talent, that he was, like he said, Staley was looking for any excuse to get linebackers out of pass coverage just based on the personnel they have. But the Chargers have stronger personnel in that area, we think. And so, like you said, they can't stay stagnant. That's what he did with the Rams, but the Rams have a better overall secondary in terms of the number of players, and I guess not proven, but it seems like Staley had a better secondary there, at least certainly with Jalen Ramsey. And so, but here you have better linebackers. So, how does that work in your pass coverage? Don't stay stagnant. Let's see how it goes. The only other one I'll add to is, that the Chargers had this range of outcomes, like he said, for this season, because the range of outcomes is so much wider because of the injuries and the fact that they lack depth, where, he talks about how the Chargers seem to be always hurt and the Rams seem to never be hurt. And for whatever reason, like the Rams have locked into something, whether it be sports performance or preseason management with someone like Whitworth, where, they're just not injured that much. So, if Staley can bring that to this team, even just a little bit, it would help their range of outcomes. Although I do like that his outcome record prediction was basically where we stand. So I feel good about ours.
Yeah, absolutely. I was able to learn a lot from him, and it was kind of comforting to learn that someone else who's really in the know is kind of predicting the same kind of outcomes for the Chargers.
Mhm.
As it pertains to the linebackers, I went back and looked because I mentioned in the interview, Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan, and in 2018 when Smith was a rookie, the two of them logged over 2,000 combined snaps. And,
Wow.
you have to get to like 7 linebackers with the Rams to get that many snaps. So
Right.
it's going to be really interesting because I think he's going to be able to play Murray and Tranquil quite a bit. And stay in kind of the nickel package with the two of those linebackers on the field. And then, you have 4 rushers and then you have 5 secondary players. So I think that's going to be, the package that we see the most often. But I just think this Chargers defense, despite the concerns of depth that the three of us have, I think he has more options with the Chargers than he did with the Rams because, the Rams, you have to play to the secondary. Like you had to get 6 defensive backs on the field almost on every single play because you just didn't have the linebacker talent. And, there's no way, you got to keep one-on-ones for Aaron Donald. So you absolutely have to have 5 rushers on the field. Like that's the only way that you can keep one-on-ones for Aaron Donald, excuse me. So I think with the Chargers, he has more options on defense. I really do. Like, I think the Rams were a historically great defense, and I don't necessarily think the Chargers will get to that kind of level. But, Staley has talked about being multiple and being able to mix things up, pretty much ad nauseum at this point. And I think he has a better chance of doing that with the Chargers than he does with the Rams, at least in terms of personnel packages.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you again, Robert Mays, for joining us out. And that interview was great. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And that kind of segues us into the overall depth on the roster, if you will. That's kind of been the main conversation. In terms of national media, we had I believe it was an NFL Network article that ranked the Chargers as the 4th most complete article, and then like the next day PFF ranked them 20th in terms of roster construction. So we're going to have that discussion now. Where would they rank in terms of how is the roster constructed? How deep is it? How complete is it? So Tyler, we'll start with you on this one. Are you kind of in the middle of, as I assume, like I am, I'm kind of going to be kind of in the middle. So where do you kind of land on where this team ranks in terms of complete roster construction?
Yeah, it's definitely in the middle for a couple of reasons. First off, the 4th overall ranking, I can't get behind that because to me, the only position that I have any faith in, like position group that I have faith in going into the season, is the quarterback, and he's only played 15 games, and like that's the guy I have the most confidence in. After that, you have a running back who, running back group, love Eckler, injuries, and the rest of the group is kind of an unknown. Wide receivers, very top heavy, love Keenan Allen, everything else is unknown. Offensive line, I think would be the next best overall position group, at least in terms of the starters, but they've never played together, and it's very unknown. Slater is still a rookie, and I don't know how they're going to play together. Tight ends, you're led by a 34-year-old tight end. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I don't know if that makes you like set at that position. Defensive tackle, major question marks. There's no true star there. Edge is good, but you're injured. They're probably not going to play the whole season, both of them. Corners are unproven. Strong safety or safety overall, top heavy superstar, always injured. And then, I assume this is discussed in both articles, but like the special teams is not complete either. I think to be a complete roster, you also have to round out your special teams. This is not a team with rounded out special teams. So being top 4 is a little odd, but bottom 20, I guess, being 20th or whatever it was, I think that's a little too far back. I do think that the Chargers they are top heavy. Like they do have a lot of good stars when they're healthy. And so I do think they deserve to be at least in the upper half of the league, not in the 20s, but that the depth behind them and so many question marks at other positions. Yeah, I fall right in the middle. Couldn't tell you where I'd put them. That would assume that I would have watched or looked at every single roster and every single player, which I don't think even the people that wrote the article did. But certainly I don't think I would be 4th, but I wouldn't be 20th. Call it, I don't know. What would I be closer to? I'll say I'd be closer to the 20th ranking than 4th.
Yeah, I think it's tough because I don't really have an exact ranking either. Like I haven't looked at every roster. I think I would maybe put them closer to 4 than 20, but I think maybe they're kind of at the end of the top 10 in terms of roster construction. But like the PFF article, I actually think in terms of their reasoning, I don't necessarily agree with their ranking, but they were like, well, they're kind of banking on a lot of things happening, right? They're banking on, okay, Chris Harris stays healthy and he's good in the slot, right? Banking on Derwin stays healthy, for a full 17 games, and you're banking on Joey stays healthy, right? And not just that, but also, the players pick up this scheme very easily, right? In this new transition. And you're banking on, say, Herbert not regressing, which I think is a safe bet, but who knows, right? And then you talk about the offensive line, who all new guys, and we're probably going to talk about this when we break down the offensive line in our position groups, but it's like their first game is at Washington. Like that, I mean, that's arguably the best defensive line in the league, and they won't have played a serious snap of football prior to that. So I think it'll be interesting, but you look at the potential and you're like, okay, if Justin Herbert, Joey Bosa, and Derwin James, and all those guys are on the field for at least, let's say 14 out of 17 games, then yeah, I think they're pretty easily a top 10 roster. But the depth is concerning, and it is what Mays kind of pointed out in his range of outcomes comment, like Tyler said earlier, where if you have a team like the Browns, who I believe are a true top 5 roster, right, you can just plug Greedy Williams in if your cornerback goes down, right? If Michael Davis goes down, it's like, okay, well, I guess Asante Samuel is our CB2, and we're moving Chris Harris back to CB1, or you're moving Faison there. Neither to me are like the most comfortable answer, right? So like, I think that's the problem in terms of how this team is constructed a little bit just from a depth standpoint. So it's like May said, this could be a 12 or 13 win team if everything goes right, and this can be a 7 or 8 win team if everything goes wrong.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I think that is most teams in the league, right? Like if you have certain injuries to certain players, like you're probably going to be losing a lot of games. But there are teams, like to me, when I think of like a top 5 roster, like Mays and Alex have both mentioned the Browns. I think you could throw some other teams in there. I wouldn't throw the Chiefs in there in terms of complete roster, but if they lose Tyreek Hill, like they'll be okay, like because of their other pieces. So if the Chargers lose Joey Bosa or Derwin James, like it's going to be a struggle. I think offensively they'll have specifically the system and the horses around Justin Herbert to kind of overcompensate for some defensive injuries more so than they did last year. But I just think, like you guys said, it's a top heavy roster, and so for me that makes it hard for me to put them into the top 5. Like I would, if I went through every single roster, I would probably have the Chargers in like the 10 to 14 range in terms of being a complete roster. Because like Tyler said, I think you have to take special teams into account here as well. And like there are position groups that I'm like good to okay, like with the depth. Like I feel pretty good about the depth at linebacker after Kenneth Murray and Trenckel. Like I'm good with Kaiser White and Nick Niemann. And whoever, if they choose Amen Agbagnamiga or whoever the 5th one is, I'm okay with the depth at cornerback. Like I don't feel great about Brandon Faison starting, but like I at least have some confidence in him being a serviceable player. I'm okay with the depth at receiver with the addition of Josh Palmer. Yeah, but offensive line, like Scott Quessenberry and Brendan Hymus are your 2 probably swing guys, and then you have probably Trey Pipkins as your swing outside tackle. So that's not great. Who's starting at safety if Nasir Adderley goes down? Like there are some question marks for me where I would kind of rank this probably, like I said, in the 10 to 14 range.
You and Alex kind of talked about the corner depth on Twitter or through Messenger. I forget. I think you're a little bit more okay with the depth. Alex is terrified of the depth. I think I lean terrified, honestly. Like I don't know if you're assuming that, like, okay, if Asante Samuel Jr. is the outside guy, Davis the other outside guy, Harris is the slot guy, then everything after that is depth. Like I'm pretty terrified of the depth behind them, honestly. The whole secondary scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, and I think it's just like Michael Davis really kind of grew last season, right, as cornerback, and you really can't teach his intangibles, right? Like, he's a guy that is 6'3" and can run a 4.3. Like Chris Harris, I mean, we've seen what happens when you put him on Tyreek Hill. It's not pretty. So I think that's kind of an issue. And, I don't think it's the worst spot on the defense, because I'd probably look to edge as something that, we need to see get better. For me, it's just like, yeah, the depth is the issue. But again, like May said, I think that if everything goes right, sure. But to me, the reality is probably that they end up somewhere between 10 and 14, which, I think they can still be, a 9 to 12 win team with. I don't think that's out of the picture. It's not quite like if everything goes wrong. But for now, I just think we have to say realistically, not everybody is going to stay healthy, but maybe not everybody will get hurt, especially with the new sports performance angle, which we talked about kind of in that interview as well.
Yeah, that's obviously something that we'll have to kind of see how that pans out. But, I don't know what it was last year and the year before that. It just kind of seemed like all the injuries really just steamrolled and piled up. So if the Chargers can even be like semi-healthy, like we've seen what the roster can do, in 2018 when they went 12-4 and the roster was like kind of healthy. So if this team's able to stay kind of healthy again, I think absolutely they could reach that ceiling. So any other thoughts on the roster, guys, and then if not, we're going to move on to our discussion on tight ends.
No, that's about it.
All right. So we're going to continue our series of breaking down these position groups. We're kind of balancing it out, offense and defense. And so today we're going to talk about the tight ends / one fullback or two, depending on how you view Hunter Kampmoyer. So let's talk about these tight ends and the fullback. Alex, what's your biggest question when it comes to, looking at this tight end group?
I think the biggest question is really just that Jared Cook and what's the drop off from Hunter Henry, because I don't think there will be a significant drop off in the passing game. I think he'll be fine. But Hunter Henry, as I was doing the stats when I'm kind of working on this tight end article right now, Hunter Henry had 79 pass blocking snaps last year. Jared Cook, the last 2 years combined, has had 14. And that I think is problematic. And it makes it a little bit different, I think, in terms of how you're going to construct the tight end and fullback group around him. So like, to me, that's kind of why you lean more Donald Parham than Steven Anderson, because Donald Parham is a better blocker and is more consistent game to game as a receiver. So I would kind of prefer him over Steven Anderson, despite those two really good receiving games he had at the end of last year. And he also has that 6'8" frame, which lends itself to blocking. They also have Trey McKitty, who maybe they envision as a tight end of the future, but, was primarily drafted in the short term to be a blocker, right? So obviously he makes the roster. And, despite all the, crap we gave him for blocking last year, I was actually looking at the numbers, and Gabe Neighbors had the Chargers' highest pass blocking grade out of their group last year. He had a 79.2 grade on PFF, which is not the end all be all, but in about 20 snaps, he did okay. So, I know Tyler's still mad Bobby Holly didn't make the team, but I think Neighbors it has to make the team as the fullback. They need to be able to use him in that way. And so to me, the four tight ends that I kind of have making it are, I think we discussed this in the roster breakdown episode, are Cook, McKitty, and, you'll have Parham and you'll have Neighbors. And that's really four tight ends and fullbacks. And I'll be curious to see how many they carry, because they could go 3, they could go 5. If they really wanted to. They went 4 last year. 5 last year if you count Neighbors. And so I don't know if they'll do that again, because they already have 4 running backs. They're probably going to carry 4 safeties. So it's like, do you really need 5 tight end fullback guys? I don't know. That'll be a question they have to answer. But in general, I guess my question is, or the main questions are, does Cook really drop off in the passing game from Henry? I don't think so. As of now, I think it'll be relatively the same production, just because I think Justin Herbert will make it work, and I think Cook is capable as a receiver. And how do you make up for his blocking? That I think is the two kind of biggest issues right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That kind of rolls into what I was thinking as well. You know, who steps up and becomes the team's Virgil Green? Not that that's all you need to be. You can be better. Have at it. You can have 4 receptions in a year. But one of the, Steven and I graded.
Hey man, that third reception though was awesome.
It was awesome. I know the guy averaged 16 yards per catch or whatever. So I mean, have at it. But I think Steven and I don't know if Jason or Alex, it was Alex. We all graded, the guys in the first quarter of last season. And Virgil Green was like a top 5 player for us, not in terms of, the value, but in terms of what he did. Yeah. He was like one of the best players the Chargers had and very underrated. And, Arjun resent me a graphic. And, when Green was on the team and Herbert was starting, the Chargers, 4 out of 5 of the games that they had with that combination, they were above the 50th percentile in EPA per play. But after Green goes down, only 5 of the next 10 were even above the 50th percentile. And like, I'm not saying that, that Green is the causation. There's not like, causation here that Green just makes the offense so much better, but they were able to do some work with Green, whether it be using him as a blocker or in his few moments as a receiver. And it looked like after the bye, they were really taking that step forward with their tight ends against Jacksonville. And then Green gets hurt and the Chargers don't have another game with an EPA per play better than that Jacksonville game until 8 weeks later against the Raiders, who were awful and were really banged up that game. So I really do think they kind of missed his presence. So who is the guy that steps up and becomes that? Is it Parham? Is it Neighbors? It's not Anderson. It's not Cook. Is it Kampmoyer? Yeah. Is it one of those guys? I don't know. But I'd love to see how they use it, especially because, as you talked about in Jeff Duncan's book, they talked about 3 tight end sets. And so who's the second guy? Who's the third guy? Who makes this offense that much better? My vote's Parham, I guess, but there's not a whole lot of great options to choose from. Maybe McKitty. I don't know. Steven, you are much more, I guess, higher or more well-knowledge, I suppose, about Trey McKitty, calling him before the draft. And, can he do this in year 1, or is this kind of like a, future down the line sort of thing?
Well, I think it's a future down the line thing just because Cook is going to play so much. Like, I think McKitty will be asked to be the blocker. Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm interested to see, though, is that, when it came to having a 6th blocker, the old staff always preferred it to be Virgil Green. Mm-hmm. And the Saints have kind of mixed it up. Like, they mix it up quite a bit with Josh Hill, and their 6 offensive linemen played quite a lot because, they would bring him in for heavy packages, which is something we didn't really see, the Chargers do almost ever under Anthony Lynn. So that could be a good way to kind of mitigate, having Jared Cook as a terrible blocker is, maybe bring in Scott Quessenberry for some plays or Trey Pipkins. And, if that gets them some more reps, I'm all for that. So I think Donald Parham can absolutely develop into a good blocker, right? Like Alex talked about his frame. Like, how many other 6'8" tight ends are out there? I don't think there's a single one. So, Donald Parham absolutely has the frame. He's got the size. He's got the physicality to kind of develop into that. But I think right away it's going to be, McKitty and Neighbors are going to be kind of the blockers. And, getting back to Neighbors for a second, it is kind of funny because, like, we all assumed that it would be Holly because Anthony Lynn wanted to run the ball, wanted to be a power offense. And it's funny because it almost feels like they chose Neighbors with this current staff in mind. Like, if you look at where this current staff has been, like, they love their Kyle Juszczyk types that are a little bit more receiver than blocker. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of funny that, like, the last staff who wanted a power fullback chose the receiving fullback for the future staffs. It's just kind of funny.
No, that is funny. They want to be multiple. And it's funny. The thing is, though, and you're right, like, they did pick up the next staff because they got the multiple tight end fullback and he had 3 receptions and 2 carries. Like, that's the most they did with him.
Yeah, and I also think it was interesting that they didn't really bring in any competition for Neighbors. I mean, I know Camp Moyer is a thing, but, Steven's,
That's just me.
Steven's ravings about Camp Moyer are more like, oh, well, what if you convert him to fullback? And he has like a full board in his room, drawing out a conspiracy theory about this. We got to put the big gritty white tight end from the Pac-12 at fullback. So I think that he can work out, but I thought it was telling that they didn't really bring in a proper fullback to compete with Neighbors, which kind of lends its credence to, they saw enough from him, at least last year from film or whatever, to say, all right, you're going to probably be on the roster, unless, they just go crazy and go no tight end or no fullbacks. But I don't think that's going to kind of happen with the current tight end makeup of this team.
Yeah, and I I want to say it was Joe Lombardi said that they kind of have viewed Neighbors as one of the smarter players on the offense. So if he's able to kind of pick things up quickly, I think that obviously would help him out. And he is Justin Herbert's roommate and best friend on the team, so that I'm sure that kind of weighed in a little bit. I don't know, but I'm actually excited to see if Neighbors gets a bigger role this year, because I think Jared Cook, like Alex was talking about, I think Jared Cook will have relatively the same kind of production that he had in New Orleans. So last year, I think Hunter Henry had like 85 targets or something like that, but Jared Cook had 73 targets, 46 receptions, 572 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So he was kind of consistently, like the third in line in targets. I don't think that's going to be. I think we'll probably see like 40 catches, 500 yards, and 5 or 6 touchdowns from Cook. So I'm just kind of curious to see where all that production ends up, because Hunter Henry, he was so involved in the offense. He had so many targets, so many catches, not super involved in the red zone until kind of the end of the season. But I'm just kind of curious to see where that production ends up, because it can't all go to Jared Cook, and it won't. I think maybe some of it could go to Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but there's a good opportunity for Parham and McKitty and potentially Neighbors to kind of be more involved this year than they were last year.
One of you guys can check PFF and see if this was the case, but I think also something in Jared Cook's production was that they were playing him less at the end of last year, and that they got some more tight ends involved. So I think that was the case, that his snaps did decrease as the season went on. So I think that'll be interesting, because I think he had 500 yards right about. So is that really a 16-game sample size, or is that something, he can add on to if he's really the tight end one here? I think that'll be interesting. Yeah.
As far as the snaps goes, it's kind of like the same. I mean, there are some games where he had like 18, but like he finished the year with 29, 26, and 20. In the middle of the season, there's some where he has 20, 19, and 13. So there are some higher games, like there's a 35 game, but I think the snaps are generally about the same. Oh, wait, I'm looking at past snaps. Oops.
Yeah.
Whatever. Point is, overall, looks about the same.
Yeah, in terms of the Saints, he logged 584 total snaps in 2019, and he logged 531 in 2020. So it was pretty much about the same. The thing that is going to be so much fun to watch with Jared Cook is, like, you couldn't have more different tight ends than Jared Cook and Hunter Henry playing a team. So one of the things that I wanted to mention here is that his target percentage changed quite a bit last year. He actually had 15% of his targets came in the deep range, which was his most since he was with the Packers in 2016. So the Saints actually used him quite a bit as a deep threat last year, more so than in previous years. In 2019, he used him as a deep on 13% of his routes. So it's only 2%, but setting a career high essentially in deep targets at age 33, like, that's pretty insane to me. So it's just going to be fun to see how they use him, how they use Parham. I feel like those two are pretty similar players, right? Like, you want to use Parham as a deep threat, as a red zone guy. So how do they kind of balance out, the deep targets at the tight end position, which is just going to be so much fun, because, we didn't see Hunter Henry have hardly any deep targets last year.
Yeah, the ability to launch it to a tight end as a deep target, it would be great for this offense. What do you think was the difference then in Cooks? Like, why did he make that jump? Was you think it was, Mays talked about the Saints playbook is just ridiculously huge and impossible to figure out, but it's not like they lost a deep threat that I would think of, so he would have to pick up that slack, because Mike Thomas is out, but I don't think that's really their deep target. And then is it just because Taysom Hill was in and he could chuck it further than 15 yards, or what do you think the reason was for his
that increase? Could be it, actually. I wonder if I can find like a breakdown of when those targets came from the deep range, because Taysom Hill probably did have some kind of effect on who was getting the deep targets there. Let me see if I can find like the specific games or anything.
Which is, I'm actually surprised it was only a 2% increase if Taysom Hill plays so many games. Although I don't remember how many games did Breeze play in 2019? He played a
I think
10.
Oh, okay.
I think 11 if you count the playoff game. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
because he got the Teddy Bridgewater thing and he hurt his hand. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So Taysom in when was Taysom starting? Do you guys remember?
The last
Because
4 weeks or maybe
Okay.
I don't.
So in the first few weeks, he's averaging like 12 yards per catch, 15, 16. And then in weeks, I think Taysom started week 12. I want to say so. Anyways, in the later part of the season, he averaged 28 yards per catch against the Falcons, 32 against the Niners, 28 against the Titans, and then 22 against the Panthers. So it jumped up more towards the end of the season. So just kind of interesting there.
Yeah, I think it was against the Falcons he started. I'm trying to find I don't know why it's so hard to find Taysom Hill stats, but yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we know that one of those touchdowns that Jared Cook had was against the Chargers. Then he got that big play down the field. But yeah, I mean, I think that his passing production will be relatively the same as kind of a Hunter Henry season. Actually, I mean, if it's 100 yards less, I don't think that's a big concern because I don't think it's that hard to find maybe Parham adding 50 yards to his total or more. Plus, you're adding McKitty into that offense. So I don't think that's a huge deal, but, we'll kind of see how it all plays out. Yeah, but that's just kind of how the Cook thing is for me. But, people, if Cook has one bad game next year, people will be like, we should have given Hunter Henry the $14 billion. But I was never in favor of that. So I'm fine with the 1 year of Cook. I would have preferred Ertz, like we talked about, but I think Cook will be fine in this role.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
We both think. No, go for it.
I was just going to say, with Jared Cook, I think this is, probably the last year. Maybe he has another year after this for him. So you get 1 year of Jared Cook. You see what you have with Donald Parham. You see what you have in Trey McKitty. And then if you need a better tight end, you can go out and get one. You can go out and draft one early if you want. So I think, like we said all along, the signing of Jared Cook just gives them a little bit more time to figure out what is going on there. So, as we're going through all this, I'm realizing like there are a lot of mouths to feed on this offense. And so Cook might get like 400 yards. Like it could be a pretty big drop off than we think, because Austin Eckler presumably is going to be healthy. Maybe you get a bigger step forward from Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson. How involved is Josh Palmer? So this tight end group might suffer quite a bit. They could be really involved. We'll just have to wait and see how that kind of pops up. But I think it's going to be so much more fun to watch Cook and Parham work together than it was Henry and Virgil Green. No shade. But Cook and Parham can just do so many more things athletically and stretch the field and do some great things after the catch. So it's going to be fun to watch this position group unfold for sure.
Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to get into next, is just for like a last sort of question, food for thought sort of thing. And I just started reading that book by Bobby Peters. It breaks down the Packers offense in 2020. Now, granted, I don't know how much the Chargers are going to use of the Packers offense, but, kind of working with the LaFleur offense isn't the worst thing in the world. And one of the things the Packers did better than anybody, according to the author at least, is run mesh, where you're having those two shallow crossing routes intersecting like 3 yards off the ball. And, now they run more variations than anybody else apparently. But one of the ones they did use was they typically had the tight end, running one of those crossers and hitting them. And so, to me, it only triggered something for me, because I swear in these practice videos, I am watching Mike Williams, Donald Parham, these guys run tons of shallow crossers over and over and getting those yards after the catch. And so I'm trying to figure out who, like, you think it's Jared Cook could do it. I don't know. Like, is there a guy that's great, like, yards after the catch in terms of like a crosser and then back up field there? Is there a guy that can beat man coverage like that on this team in the tight end group? Like, I don't really know. Is it McKitty? Is he more athletic?
It's Anderson, man.
It's Anderson.
Anderson is the best after the catch guy on the tight end group, in my opinion.
Right. So, I mean, if they decide to go that way, that's obviously, great for him to make the roster. We didn't think he'd make the roster, but he is like that. That is his thing. So, again, I don't know how much the Chargers are going to run anything the Packers are doing. Obviously, they have their center. So, some things could help there, I guess. But, just food for thought. I just saw that. And then watching the practice videos, I swear I'm watching them run a bunch of shallow crossers. So I'm just curious who that guy would be. Maybe it's Anderson.
Yeah, I think the Anderson thing is actually more interesting. I don't think it's a lock that he doesn't make the roster. I think it's a kind of open question, depending on who they would keep. I mean, they're going to keep McKitty. They're going to keep Cook. That's, I think we're pretty sure on Neighbors. And then that kind of makes it a Cook versus Parham thing, I guess, a little bit. Or sorry, not Cook versus Parham. Anderson versus Parham, in the sense of, if you want that guy that can stretch the field, or do you want that guy who's going to be more your blocker, lob it up to him guy, like we saw with Parham last year? So I guess that's kind of the competition. But again, if they wanted, they did keep 5 tight ends last year, including Gabe Neighbors at fullback. So maybe they do that again. Like I just said, I just don't love the depth on this team to the point where I want to keep that many, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I'd rather have one more edge player, or one more safety, one more corner, whatever it is, than have, I guess both Anderson and Parham. So I guess that's the question, is which way does the coaching staff lean? Because it felt like last year's coaching staff leaned pretty heavily towards Parham once he started catching fire. But I don't know kind of what this coaching staff will be in regards to that. Like Tyler brings out, they may want to run more of those mesh routes and more of those kind of stretched field plays, which Anderson, did excel in those last 2 games last year. However, the rest of the season, he had 6 yards. So, it's a tough situation. So I don't think it's a lock by any means that Anderson doesn't make the team, but that might be an interesting kind of preseason battle that nobody's talking about. I don't know.
Well, I just think, obviously, Jared Cook is not the long-term solution for the Chargers, but I think him and Donald Parham are kind of similar in terms of skill set. And maybe that could lend itself to maybe looking at Donald Parham as being a little redundant. I happen to think that, Parham probably has the best chance of the other 3 of being like a future tight end 1. So I don't know. That's going to be an interesting conversation, because I do think it is a debate that this team will be having, because the issue with Steven Anderson is that he was so bad on special teams. Mm-hmm. But if you're using Neighbors and McKitty on special teams, then Anderson doesn't have to do that. And so if you're wanting like different kinds of tight ends, right? Like Cook, Anderson, and McKitty would be 3 very different tight ends. You can do different things with all 3 of them. I think Parham and Cook probably is a little redundant. If you're wanting more options, then that's something to consider. But it's such a tricky thing to balance, right? Because, like I said, you're hoping that Parham can kind of be your future tight end 1, whereas Cook is only for 1 year. And you just signed Jared Cook. Like, you're not going to cut Jared Cook before you even see what you have. And maybe you're looking at, Donald Parham and Steven Anderson and kind of the same thing. Like, we can't really cut them. Like, we want to see what we have in them. So maybe they do keep all 5 guys, including Gabe Neighbors. I don't know. That's going to be something that they'll have to figure out in training camp.
Yeah, I could see them keeping all 5. I don't know. Stock up for Anderson, maybe.
Maybe they'll keep all 6, including Hunter Kempmeyer.
Oh man, that's just me like trying to think a little bit outside of the box, thinking that maybe he could be a fullback kind of guy. But it doesn't seem like he's taken any reps with their running backs, which obviously Gabe Neighbors has. Mm-hmm. He's been working with the tight end, so it does seem like Gabe Neighbors is safe. And I am, like, as much as we joke about it, I am excited to see what year 2 holds for Gabe Neighbors, because I'm fairly confident saying that he's going to be more involved this year than he was last year.
Absolutely, and it'll justify the roster spot. Part of my disdain from keeping him is they didn't do anything with him.
They didn't use him, yeah.
And so, now you can kind of justify the fact that you have him over Bobby Holly, which it would finally make sense.
Yeah.
Versatility, baby.
Yeah, too bad Anthony Lynn and company never knew how to use any versatility on any spot on the roster.
Oh boy. Except Easton Stick.
Except Easton Stick.
Oh God, those Jaguars ribs.
Oh man, so bad. All right, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
I'll go first. Even if the tight end room doesn't quite pan out, as great as we hoped, it's they're spending $7 million on the entire position group as a whole. Like, even if it doesn't pan out, even if they can only just kind of replicate what they did last year, it's still way cheaper. And so if they can do it, as a group, it takes a village, a tight end village. That's great. It only cost them $7 or so million.
Yeah, I think that's true. And even if, let's say Jared Cook.
Whoa.
Jared Cook.
Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa.
Oh, yes. Oh, we have our new soundbite. Oh, that's great. Oh, my goodness. All right.
Okay. Even if Jared Cook's production does dip from Hunter Henry, I think that let's say he gets 400, 500 yards. That's not going to be too much of a dip from the 600, 700 that Hunter Henry had. And like Steven said, you do have so many mouths to feed on offense against them.
So many mouths to feed, huh, Alex?
Jesus.
All right, I can't finish. You guys got to finish the show.
Man, you hosted?
Yeah.
I can't believe we got through it.
This is a miracle that this didn't happen while Alex was hosting. Oh, man. Oh, my gosh. Good one. But yeah, I guess kind of finishing this up. I guess my final thought, Jesus.
I'm done.
All right. Okay. One of the things we talked about with Robert Mays was that, and that we've talked about on the show is kind of that next year is the push all your chips in year. And so maybe, like Tyler was saying, maybe they kind of are punting the tight end position this year. Next year, there's quite a few options in terms of free agent tight ends. Jay Howard is a free agent. Hayden Hurst is a free agent. Evan Ingram is a free agent. David Njoku is a free agent. Mike Gesicki is a free agent. Obviously, all those guys have actually hit free agency. And then, of course, there is Alex's beloved Zach Ertz. So quite a few options next year in terms of free agency if everything goes kind of poorly this year. But we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. Alex, are you able to have any final thoughts now?
Yeah. Just to finish up what I was saying before I there was an error in my ways. I would say, yeah, like even if the production does dip, they do have a lot of guys that they have to get the ball to on offense. And, if Mike Williams has, a lot more yards, let's say, than he did last year, let's say he goes up 200 and maybe Parham goes up, like, I don't think it's a big deal that Cook would go down, right? And so I think looking at the production from that standpoint, if this was maybe last year's offense, I think Hunter Henry having a lesser role would be a big problem, or not putting up as many yards. But I think they understand that Jared Cook's a little bit older, and so I don't think it'll be a huge deal if his numbers do dip. And they could realistically bring him back next year. I mean, we think this will be a 1-year thing, but it's like, well, if you don't see what you exactly want out of Parham, maybe you don't see exactly what you want out of Kitty yet, and you think that they just still need a little bit more time, it's not impossible that they bring him back next year and say draft another tight end or sign another one in free agency. So I think that you just go into the year looking at Jared Cook as kind of, an experiment, and, see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for tuning in. Oh, no. Jeez. Thanks for tuning in for the last few minutes, those of you that have stuck around. We're going to continue our positional breakdowns from here on out, and hopefully get some more interviews that you guys will appreciate. I
don't think the Chargers are going to let us interview Jared Cook.
I've made him well endowed.
Jesus. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.